Thank you for joining today's webinar hosted by R.O.EYE. Presenting today will be Anthony Clements, Managing Partner at Connected Path, and Tim Hall, Head of Insight at R.O.EYE. Connected Path is a digital marketing consultancy whose mission is to improve understanding of the connected internet journey through measurement and analysis. Anthony will take us through the impact of GDPR on one particular measurement approach, multi-touch attribution. R.O.EYE is a performance marketing agency, and we've developed our own approach to multi-touch attribution, and Tim will talk you through how we've addressed the GDPR requirements as outlined by Anthony. All phones are muted, so please submit any questions that you have through the chat, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end of the presentations. We aim to finish by 1 p.m. depending on how many questions we have. So let me hand over to Anthony to begin.
First, let's talk about why multi-touch attribution is even important. Why are we here? Why have we joined the webinar to talk about it? Oracle did a study that found that 67% of purchases are made using more than one device. And some research actually suggests that figure is even higher. Consumers also take in a large variety of content and marketing along their purchase journey. The average shopper makes 9.5 visits to a retailer's site before making a purchase. And these fragmented customer journey paths make multi-touch attribution essential to properly understand the way customers interact and buy products online. And if we think that, according to the IAB, 22 billion is spent in the UK alone on advertising to acquire customers, the benefit to marketers of MTA is really to answer this crucial question: how can my marketing budget be spent as effectively and efficiently as possible? Tune and Acceleration Partners did some research that was published earlier this year that suggested multi-touch attribution is now the most commonly used model to measure cross-channel marketing effectiveness in the UK and the US. So multi-touch attribution is a here and now concept for marketers. GDPR. For those of you that have forgotten or perhaps have tried to forget, GDPR is obviously going to be an important concept to what we're talking about today. So just a quick recap on what GDPR is or was. GDPR was a new set of rules designed to give EU citizens more control over their personal data, came into effect 25th of May this year. And broadly speaking, its goals or its legislation couldn't be broken down into these 6 broad areas. The 2 that we're really focused on today: personally identifiable information. The definition of personal data was greatly expanded under GDPR. And importantly for the concept of online tracking, it was expanded to include this idea of pseudonymous identifiers like IP address and device identifiers that are important for online measurement, and also consent. GDPR changed this idea of consent to the extent that silence or inactivity will no longer constitute consent, and businesses must therefore make asking for consent to process personal data explicit. Right off the bat, GDPR presented some significant barriers to not only the cross-channel attribution industry, but really any company whose business is predicated around online tracking. The ability to identify individual consumers is an important, if not the important, requirement for multi-touch attribution. And that means successful attribution needs to be able to identify an individual user and plot the path of that user across multiple marketing touch points, certainly online and potentially offline, and crucially also across multiple devices. This kind of user-level audience identification requires the collection of what GDPR classes as personally identifiable information. Particularly these kind of pseudonymous identifiers like location data, device identifiers, IP addresses that are used to stitch together a user's journey across the internet. User consent, which remember under GDPR needs to be more informed and active, is therefore required to collect the important personal identifiers that are needed for successful online measurement and successful attribution. More stringent consent requirements, therefore, reduces the potential effectiveness and accuracy of multi-touch attribution. Really, from the day GDPR came into effect, it instantly became harder for any marketer to access a holistic view of their customer. And GDPR has effectively restricted the access that attribution solutions have to both current data and the data they might need in the future to perform proper user measurement. GDPR's challenge for the attribution industry was therefore maintaining the ability to collect accurate user journey data with these more stringent requirements around personally identifiable information and consent. So, GDPR and the infamous duopoly. So against this backdrop of enhanced user privacy, both Google and Facebook, two of the largest advertising companies in the world, have made changes to the way user-level information is accessed from their platform. And this has had a significant impact on the attribution industry, and particularly particularly independent attribution companies. And to explain what I mean, let's talk a little bit about the humble yet very important DoubleClick user identifier. The DoubleClick ID was a user-level identifier that was connected to event data collected through the DoubleClick ad server. It allowed marketers to pull together impression data from DoubleClick Campaign Manager and export that data and plug it in alongside other third-party marketing data for independent cross-platform measurement. On GDPR Day, May 25th, this encrypted user ID was no longer made available in data transfers for events recorded in the Google Market platform, as long as those events were associated with the European Economic Area. It was no longer made available for YouTube impressions globally, and then events from buyers, which was formerly the DoubleClick Ad Exchange. Without these IDs exportable into DCM log files, it became much harder to determine true reach and frequency of advertising or to build multi-touch attribution models. Now, Google's official reason for removing this level of information was to ensure compliance with GDPR. However, there is a school of thought in the attribution industry that this was convenient timing for a company that is heavily invested in its own attribution products. The upshot for marketers was undeniable. Instantly, it was more difficult to compare impression data across platforms because there was a crucial piece of information missing. Possibly missed touch points from one platform to another, and certainly difficulty for independent attribution platforms to get an accurate single customer view. And the real upshot of that is it becomes harder for independent companies independent attribution companies to ultimately compete with Google's solution because they have a piece of information that is not available to other companies. Facebook made a similar move, citing the need to protect people's privacy. Facebook view tags are no longer usable by other platforms, which means advertisers can't measure Facebook impressions in third-party attribution solutions. That was also a change made this year, and that was made against a backdrop of Facebook generally closing down access to user-level data from their platform, both in the Facebook API and Instagram API. So that's how Google and Facebook have reacted to GDPR in terms of the information that we can gather from their platforms to perform accurate cross-channel measurement. So what are the options to continue to run accurate and effective multi-touch attribution? Now the impact of GDPR on the industry is becoming clearer. I think it's worth saying at this point that both our companies, both R.O.EYE and Connected Path, believe in the power of an independent multi-touch attribution solution, i.e. attribution and measurement that's done by a company that doesn't also consider online advertising as one of its most important revenue streams. It's also worth noting that independent solutions have to accept a certain amount of granularity is now lost to them, this impression level data from Google and Facebook. So what are the options for advertisers to continue to run accurate, insightful multi-touch attribution? The first is to work with an independent attribution solution that will build a native integration into the advertiser's website. The most common way attribution companies are continuing to collect user journey data in this post-GDPR world is to have a native integration on the advertiser's site that can collect encrypted user-level identifiers. And because this is done on the advertiser's site, the advertiser themselves will normally have the onus or responsibility to gain consent for the attribution solution to do that. And that's the most common way that that cross-channel attribution is done in our industry at the moment. Another option is maybe using a new ad server that completely avoids the Google platform. Something of a nuclear option, probably certainly not available for smaller advertisers, but it's interesting to actually consider in the future whether a lack of insight and compatibility will actually see advertisers move away from Google as an ad server. And the third option for advertisers in this post-GDPR world is to go with Google. You can access user-level identifiers that are attributable to Google impression data inside the Google platform as long as you use something like Google Ads Data Hub and then bring third-party marketing data back into it. A solution that perhaps builds that walled garden even higher, but is also an option for advertisers. So that's where we are, attribution in a post-GDPR world. I'm now actually going to hand over to Tim, who's going to talk a little bit more about single view and what single view is doing.
So as Anthony points out, as a third-party attribution provider, we've had some challenges since the 25th of May. But I think how we seek to differentiate ourselves in the marketplace is very much around our transparency and moving away from some of the black box approach of Google and Facebook. Key to this is our own user tracking, so we're not dependent on the DoubleClick stack or any other third-party sources for our own tracking. We run our own tracking ourselves, and certainly because of that, we can then begin to understand exactly what information we're collecting on the audience. So one of the major changes made in our own attribution solution post the 25th of May is that we no longer collect any personally identifiable information, such as IP address or other identifiable information. To comply with a lot of the work we have to do with the clients, the tag is very much deployed by the client. So as Anthony points out, we work in a native environment whereby we have to work very closely with clients to understand how our privacy policies are consistent. We have to understand the privacy policies of the client before we deploy our tag. But the key to this is actually it's delivering first-party data. So we know exactly where the data is coming from. We know exactly how we store it. We know exactly, as does the client, how we can store the data. And key to this, of course, is that when the user accepts the cookie policy on the user's site, on the client's site, then they're giving consent to collect that information about them. And certainly what that's allowed us to do is to meet those challenges of GDPR, is that we've now got the continued ability to collect accurate user journey data and model that data, which I'll come on to just next. So key to this really is what do we do with it next? Why would we want to collect this information? How do we want to work with it? So one of the things that we've done over the last 12 months is develop our own proprietary algorithm. So we really want to understand a lot more around how this can be used really to overcome the limitations of rules-based models, which I'll come on to in the next slide. But just a very brief overview of the work that we've done this year is that the core algorithm that we work with in our own attribution solution is based on Shapley game theory. But because it's granular data and transparent data, we've been able to apply our own learnings as marketeers to it to make the model more intuitive. As Google only does the last 4 steps in the path to purchase in 360, what we're able to do is model up to 8 user journey touch points within that entire path to purchase, so we get a much more of a holistic view of that path to purchase and which points are key in the path to purchase. And I think as I've alluded to, one of the key things that we find is that because it's not a black box solution, we're much more open about how the model works, what its limitations are, how it works well. And key to this really is we've no channel bias. I think as we've alluded to previously with independent attribution providers, we've no skin in the game. We have no bias with no product we want to sell in these. So we can then give a much more balanced view of channel performance and channel revenue. Interestingly, one of the examples we saw with this was when we worked with a particular client who had TV spend over a particular period, and actually saw their increase in direct traffic, increasing the actual model itself, but that wasn't appropriate and wasn't seen in AdWords, partly because AdWords was still taking the credit for some of the PPC search there. Ours model will treat all channels the same and doesn't put a weighting on them. And further to that, if we want to tune it to specific user requirements, we can do. If there's particular usage in terms of the path to purchase or anything unusual about a particular client's journeys, we can tune the model accordingly if need be. But really, I think the key point I want to articulate really is the limitations of the rules-based model and why we believe a multi-touch journey and measurement system is so much more effective in terms of collecting those key moments on the path to purchase. So I'm sure you're all familiar with some of the models that we would see in terms of what you capture under a first click model or most traditional models of last non-direct click or last. But actually what you fail to see potentially within these is actually which is the moment of decision. If some of those moments of decision on the path to purchase aren't captured in a first or a last click touch point and they're actually happening midway through the journey, then clearly the rules-based models are failing to capture that, and you're not seeing which channels are driving the most conversion in terms of that moment of decision within the path to purchase. The question I want to give a little bit of an enlightenment to is, well, how do we capture that? And how does it play to the limitations of a rules-based model? So to make the model quite simple, we look at all steps in the path to purchase. So for example, if we know the conversion rate of customer journey 1 here, which is a conversion rate of 2%, but actually if we introduce another touch point in that journey, touch point C. So let's, for example, we've introduced a new channel which has been the key moment in the path to purchase, and that's increased the conversion rate by 50%. Under a rules-based model, then touch point D at the end of the path to purchase there would get all the credit for it. But what our model does in terms of looking at that, we'll look at all steps in the path to purchase, both in converting and unconverted journeys, to understand the relative importance of each of these touch points. So because we model all of those in the Shapley model, if we do see that touch point C is consistently driving those decisions and in the path to purchase, and we can see that across all touch points, then the model will reward those touch points that a traditional rules-based model won't. So to summarize, this isn't possible without a multi-touch attribution solution. And to pull all those together to recap, you see the inputs that we work with. So we'll look at all touch points in the path to purchase. We'll consider all the converting and non-converting journeys. We'll bring those into our own modeling that we look to in terms of the game theory model and how we've embellished it with our own real-world learnings, and certainly looking at the transparent and approach in terms of how we do that. And then the outputs, which I'll take through in just a moment, is very much we can then develop this into a platform. So the platform I'm just going to walk through with some examples today will give you an idea of how we're using it in practice. I think one of the key things I'd want to say with this is that because it's all granular data, this is just one step on our own development roadmap. There's lots of detailed data in here that we work with specific clients to answer specific questions about campaigns and to understand exactly how all those channels play together. But without further ado, I think if I give you an example of how the tool works, this is what the interface looks like. It's not possible really to go through all the examples today just to give you a flavour of from a screen sharing perspective of the detail on them. But basically, you've got a simple interface. You can change the graph at the top to look at spend, attributed spend, R.O.EYE, and CPA. We attach the tool to all the Google ad downloaders so we can get cost from affiliates and from AdWords and from other sources. But if I walk you through a paid search example, you can see the table at the bottom. This is what it then looks like. So I can see for this particular client here, how much they've spent on AdWords, what the attributed revenue is, and also what the last revenue is. So if I want to understand exactly how much of these channels are driving using traditional methods, but also on an attributed basis, then it's clear in the interface in terms of what that's actually driving. I can go down the levels of taxonomy. I can begin to look at both generic and brand as we split those out. Clearly, there's a very difference in the R.O.EYE and how you'd distribute spend between those two particular channels. And if I go here and have a look at individual campaigns, I can go further to keyword if I wish. I can then begin to understand how this client's particularly using the tool to re-optimize their spend. So we're looking at these particular campaigns. So just generic campaign number 1. When I look at the last click revenue compared to the attributed revenue, I'm seeing here that this particular campaign is driving a lot more value over the course of the journey path. than it is being given for on a last click basis, and that's the same with a number of these here. So what this particular client's done is started to re-optimize against these campaigns so they can see which ones are driving most across the journey path. And if necessary, the reverse is true. I can also turn the interface to have a look around here. If I want to look at exactly which campaigns are driving a low ROI, I can then begin to see, for example here, that which campaigns are potentially driving less revenue on an attributed basis or very small amounts of revenue. So again, this client's also been using this to trim their spend on these campaigns that aren't driving attributed revenue across the whole. If I look at affiliates, one of the areas that we can look at with affiliates, and one of the key questions we get here is, particularly with affiliates, is very much, well, they would cannibalize the journey path. You would have had this sale already. Well, if I've talked through the model in terms of how the model would work, if that was the case, then we wouldn't, the model would not reward them. So in that path to purchase, if it wasn't contributing to conversion, then the potential could score 0. But if I have a look at how we then break these down, when I look at cashback, content, and voucher, they're not quite as much attributed revenue as on a last click basis, but it's still very healthy revenues that are being driven in this particular channel. And I can also split these down by cash, content, and voucher. And when I look at content, for example, these are particularly publishers who are driving content in the upper funnel that you don't always see. So again, what we've been able to do is drill down into individual affiliates. We can have a look at exactly how much attributed revenue they're driving. This particular affiliate had a tenancy over a particular time period. So again, you can see clearly in the graph the impact of that particular tenancy on the attributed revenue. And I can then begin to see exactly what that's driven. So clearly what this demonstrated for this client, and they were questioning the value of their affiliates campaign, that actually it wasn't cannibalizing their revenue, but assisting conversion. And when I look at some last couple, just to show you some display examples, we've been able to bring post-impression data in for Criteo into modeling and look at exactly what that's driving both on a post-click and a post-impression basis. The key metric here really was when we compared some of these numbers to what Criteo were saying, that the clients simply didn't believe the numbers that was coming out of the Criteo interface. The numbers gave an R.O.EYE of in excess of 38. When we got these numbers in and were able to look at how they both worked on a post-click and post-impression basis on the path to purchase, we got a very consistent 4.4 over that particular time. Again, the same for prospecting. Slightly different with these, and we can look now at first-click revenue to understand how much a particular campaign is driving those interactions at the very beginning of the path to purchase. Less so in terms of attributed revenue because then other channels are having to convert that. But in this particular instance, we're able to use the tool then to understand exactly how we would see that at the beginning of the path to purchase. So then just to summarise before I hand back to Jonathan, really the value journey as we see it and how we've had to work with GDPR and multi-touch attribution is we work from our own data-driven algorithms. Some of the things we can work through is understanding exactly how these channels play together, what the halo effect is in terms of how spend in one channel affects spend in another. Certainly one of the other things we've looked at then is beginning to understand saturation modelling. Some of the work we've done in addition to detail work is to understand, well, where does diminishing returns come in as I spend more on a channel? Where does that begin to fall away? And then pulling all those together in respect of some of the spend allocation. So again, budgeting for the course of the year, understanding how all these channels play together in respect of the overall attributed revenue and the overall value that these are driving. So again, to summarise, we look at all the converting and unconverting journeys, and hopefully today we'll give you some examples of where we've avoided wasted spend and missed targets.
That's great. Thank you very much, Anthony and Tim, for that. I'd be like to now open the floor to questions. So if anybody has any questions, that feel free to drop them through the chat, and we'll get Anthony and Tim to answer. I can see one being typed at the moment. Whilst we're just waiting for that one to come in, I did have one earlier. Oh, here we go. So how do we integrate with Facebook Ad Manager? So
it is one of the key challenges. So we're not able to bring in post-impression data. We've had some really good results on a post-click basis, and we can bring those into the purchase. But I think, as Anthony alluded to at the very beginning of the presentation, Facebook from a post-impression basis is very much a walled garden to us. So that is one of the challenges in terms of that level of granularity that we struggle with.
Okay, that's great, Tim. I had another question earlier, which was for Anthony, and it was more in the realms of the general approach to attribution. And if you could give any examples into potentially some of the clients that you've worked with to show the sorts of results that attribution is delivering to them.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I obviously won't name specific clients because I haven't got their permission. That might be a bit unfortunate. But yeah, I can give some sort of high-level overviews on that. So the way budget is reassigned, which is ultimately the goal of multi-touch attribution for marketers, very much depends on the sector that you're working with. We've done work in things like the automotive sector where upper funnel channels, they're further away from the conversion in the automotive sector. It might be a test drive, or it might be an application, have more spend reassigned to them in a multi-touch attribution model. Sometimes in retail, you can be surprised with how important conversion orientated channels end up being in multi-touch attribution. You tend to sometimes see spend reassigned away from channels that are very voracious in the way they track and track conversions, and Facebook are a little like that in terms of the way their conversion tracking is implemented. High level, I've seen as much as 35% of total annual marketing budget reassigned under a multi-touch attribution. That wouldn't be uncommon. I think that answers the question.
Anthony, we've had another question about how we integrate with the mobile apps SDK to track where the user originally subscribed from. I'll hand that one over to Tim.
Yeah, we have looked at it. We've not done one live, but certainly it would depend on what the SDK looks like and how we could capture our own cookie ID within that. Potentially, if that was key to the path to purchase and there was a mobile SDK within there, then we'd have to look at that as a bespoke development job, but certainly we can have a look at doing that.
Okay, and then I think another interesting question there about the retrospective analysis of commission and how to look at how we share commission in attribution world. I think that might be a good one for Anthony to comment on. And it is early days in the use of attribution, so it'd be good to get your view on how commissions might change once we get different views on way relevance should be attributed.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest there with regard. I think that's specifically related to the affiliate channel. And if I'm honest, I think that multi-touch attribution and the way spend is reassigned should be retrospective. I don't particularly believe in the affiliate channel of sharing a post-sale CPA amongst many affiliates. I certainly believe in taking the learnings of multi-touch attribution and assigning more more spend into the affiliate channel and into specific types of affiliates based on the outcome. But I don't particularly believe that the commission in the affiliate channel should be split. I think it should be retrospective.
And then we have another question about the which channels drove subscriptions, which follows on from the one about the service developer kit. Let me get Tim to answer that one.
I guess if it's on your own website, we'd have a look at that. One of the things that we can pass back in the cookie is really kind of any value you want to pass back. So at the moment, we'd capture a transaction ID and an order amount, for example. But that's not to say if you wanted to pass back a different type of event that said this was an event that resulted in a mobile app download, that we could then begin to capture that. So if we capture that as an event at the end of the path to purchase and we consider a download in inverted commas as being a purchase, then there's no reason why we can't begin to understand what drove those if we can understand what tech you're using when we can integrate it.
That's great. Thanks, Tim. I think we're just passing the top of the hour now, and there's no more questions coming in on the chat at the moment. So I'd like to once again just thank Connected Path and Anthony Clements for taking part in today's webinar, and also for Tim for the work that he's been doing here on the solution that we have towards attribution. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining, and we'll keep you posted as we continue our series of webinars in 2019. Thank you very much, and goodbye.